What's going on, everybody? Today I'm going to be showing you how to install the timing chain on this 2007 Yamaha FZ6. This is the kind of job you'd be doing after you've changed the valve lash on the top end of the motor, or God forbid you're doing a head gasket job on this engine. As with any timing job, it's a little tricky and finicky, but I'm going to walk you through the finer points of doing it, so let's get into it. As always, please smash the like and subscribe button down below. It really helps me out. First things first, you'll have your cams in their holders torqued down to 7.2 foot-pounds on all the cam cap holder bolts. You want to align them so that the E mark is pointing down towards the head right here, and the I mark is pointing up in line with the cylinder head right here. Just approximately. We're going to tweak them once they're in there, but that's roughly where you want them to go, so you don't have to spin the cam 180 degrees to get it in the right spot where it will end up. Next, you have to get the T on your pickup rotor lined up with the line built into the block here. This can be done in two orientations, basically here or 360 degrees and looking like it's the same, but what you're going for is having your intake and exhaust cam lobes pointing away from each other on cylinder number 1, which is across the engine. Once you have your cams in and torqued down, your tensioner still won't be in. The chain will be slack and you'll just want to start lining it up. The goal here is that you have basically no slack on the side coming off the exhaust cam gear down here to your crankshaft, and leaving all the slack between the intake gear and the crank gear. To get the cams in position, you can use a screwdriver basically to get in the holes of the cam gears and just tweak them up and tweak them down. Be very gentle because the cylinder head is aluminum and you don't want to mar the surface where the valve cover gasket meets it. You'd usually have hexagonal flats on the camshaft to get a wrench on there and turn them, but these don't have those provisions, so gently work a screwdriver in there and it should be fine. The reason we want to have no slack between the exhaust and the crankshaft gear is because all the slack must be taken up by this timing guide on the left that's pressed on by the tensioner here. So wiggle your cams, get them nice and taut. As you can see, with the tensioner installed, there's no slack in the chain coming across here, and there's none either on the chain coming from the exhaust down to the crank. And when you're ready, you're going to install the tensioner. You have to use a screwdriver in the back of the tensioner, holding it so it doesn't extend. As you put it into the cylinder head, you'll then thread in the Allen head bolts, still keeping the screwdriver in the back of the tensioner. Thread in the Allen head bolts that hold the tensioner, and when you feel like the tensioner is seated against the head and you think it's ready to be released, let the tensioner unwind and pull your screwdriver out, and you'll see it apply tension. Then you'll start to spin the motor over. If it all looks good and you think it took up slack in the right place between the intake cam gear and the crank gear, spin the motor over. You'll do 2 full revolutions and the lines should line up if done correctly. We go 2 revolutions because that's how many revolutions of the crankshaft it takes to complete the 4-stroke cycle. So go 2 revolutions and check your E lines up and your I lines up. There should be no question in your mind that these things are lined up when done correctly. The T should be perfect, the E should be perfect, and so should the I. If any single gear here isn't lined up perfectly, do it again. Trust me, the engine will not run right, and you'll possibly do damage to your pistons and valves if you try and run an engine that's out of sync by 1 tooth. It's definitely tricky to get the tensioner into the back of the motor with just your 2 hands, so it's helpful to have another friend to hold the screwdriver into the tensioner while you insert it and get your Allen head bolts in there. One thing I've done when lining up this motor along with others is I'll spin the crank just a hair while I've got the chain over the exhaust cam gear coming down to the crank gear to see if there's any slack, even before the tensioner goes in. This way I can know if I'm off a tooth or not, because if I turn the crank and it starts to move before the cam gear moves, I know that I'm taking up slack here. So then I'll go back, reverse the motor a little bit, lift the chain off, move it back 1 link and take up the slack and move the slack, shuffling it back 1 tooth on the gear, on the exhaust, 1 tooth on the intake, and leaving the slack on the left side where the tensioner is. Then once again, line up the T, start to rotate the motor, and if the exhaust cam gear rotates at the same time as I begin to rotate the bottom end, you've got rid of all your slack on the right side here. And just send it. Turn it over twice, see if the marks line up, and if they don't, oh well, take it apart, do it again. It's not the end of the world. You'd have a pretty difficult time bending a valve when you're just spinning the motor over by hand. That's a wrap on this timing chain job on this 2007 Yamaha FZ6. Let me know if you have any questions about this process. I'll be happy to answer them down in a comment down below. And as always, thanks for watching. Hope you have a good day.